Hey everybody, it's Tracy Brown from Stained Glass Spirit. Are you enjoying the From Hatred to Harmony live summit? If you've been listening in to some of the other conversations, just kind of drop a note in the chat. What are you getting from today? Are there other people that you want to recommend someone listen to, maybe who's listening to this one for the first time, and don't know about the conversations with other people? In this conversation, I get to spend some time with Reverend Masando Hiraoka. And if you don't know Masando, then you are in for a treat, getting to know some of his perspective, some of the things that he is about, and his unique experience with this topic of spirituality addressing racism. So, Masando, you already know we're not introducing everybody formally. So as you're responding, you can drop in any information you want people to have. But let's start with this whole idea that our spiritual teachings require us to be engaged and involved in interrupting or ending racism. Why is this subject important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to separate this subject or anything that has to do with the whole from my own personal spiritual life, right? Like, I think about not just like spirituality, but like the spiritual community, like the beloved community, which in many ways has gotten bigger during this time, right? Even though we're not going to the church, like the physical buildings, now we are connecting with people from all around the US, from all around the world. And I feel like in many ways, my spiritual community has grown. But I think about how when I look at my own spiritual path, it was so much, honestly, it was so much about waking up to all of the things that weren't working in my life. All of the stories that I had created about myself, some of those that were inherited from family, from society, from media, from all of the different ways that those stories get created. And so much of the spiritual path was one, being embraced by this spiritual community, right? That like saw me for who I was outside of all of those stories. But then also disrupting, interrupting, calling out all of the stories that were untrue. And in its place, beginning to focus upon a deeper spiritual nature of who I was, right? And when I look at anti-racism work, when I look at what's going on in the world right now, like, not gonna lie, it feels kind of apocalyptic. Like, it's intense. Like, it's intense out here right now. Like, being alive in 2020 is kind of a lot. It's a lot. I think we are all being affected by it in different ways. However, when you look at the word apocalypse, right, it means revealing. So much is being revealed individually from our time just being in our homes, and collectively from, I think, also from being in our homes, but recognizing these greater things that have been happening maybe underneath the surface of our own awareness or of some folks' awareness, and now it's just like being revealed, right?
Yes.
So apocalyptic times don't have to be so scary, but they do require that we lean into our spiritual life and recognize that these things that are showing themselves, right, don't have ultimate power, but they have had so much influence. Just as like the stories that, you know, were created by about myself have had so much influence, right, have created all of my experiences in life. We're seeing how these things that have been embedded in our culture, just literally baked in every aspect of our culture, of our society. Like, we're seeing how those things are real on this mass scale, not just in our country, but across the world, right? It's incredible that this is not just happening here in the US, happening everywhere, right? So social life, personal life, personal transformation, social transformation, like we're all part of this one life, right? And so to try to separate the two or compartmentalize them, to me, like in many ways, we're kind of just lying to ourselves when we try to do that, right? Like we're part of this one life, we're part of this collective consciousness, and so anything that's happening in the world is having an impact on us, and we are also impacting it. Like we get to be a part of the story. That is what this being human is. That we're constantly impacting the story that is happening right now. Like we get this, whatever generation we in, we get to write this chapter, right? And we get to take everything that we've inherited, and we get to do what we will, and then create something new. And that's also part of the spiritual life. It's recognizing like, ugh, look at all this stuff like I inherited. Look at all this stuff we inherited. It ain't pretty, a lot of it. But guess what? Like that's not the end of the story.
You know, what happens so often is related to that is we get stuck in the blaming and the shaming and looking back at what
100%.
we inherited and they were wrong and who did this. And in doing that, looking backwards and doing the blame and shame, then we get stuck in the defensiveness of, well, I am not racist, or I don't do anything to support racism. I'm not the problem, so I don't need to take any action. And we hear that a lot from people who are spiritually grounded, spiritually trained, but if for some reason on this topic, it's their fault. It doesn't have anything to do with me, and there's nothing for me to do.
100%. This spiritual freedom is also spiritual responsibility, right? This, like if we really believe in our identity of oneness, which is at the core of our theology and not our philosophy. I love David Alexander. If you guys haven't watched David Alexander's piece on this and you want to geek out and you really want to get into it, like go watch that interview. He will teach you some things. But like, if we really believe in this identity of oneness, like which is a spiritual identity, right? If we really seek to live that out, and actually, if we really believe that that's true, right? Like we have to also believe that we can do something about whatever is going on, and that we can take responsibility for this life, for this collective life that we are a part of, and know that like this is why when we're working with anti-racism work, I try to do my best to focus on systems and not people that we're carrying out those systems. Because let's be real, presidents and legislators and whoever we happen to be projecting all of the problems on right now, whoever that is, like they're going to come and go. But these systems, which are embedded in our society, and let's be real, in our consciousness, which is the cause, the ultimate cause of all this, like that's going to continue to go. And that scapegoat will change, and we'll just continue to put the onus upon someone else, right? And put the blame, exactly like you're saying, upon someone else. We don't recognize it as a consciousness that we are seeking to transform, as a healing that needs to happen within every single one of us. And it'll just continue to have its life, right? And nothing will actually change, right?
Right.
So that's what I love. I mean, this is all spiritual work to me. This is all consciousness work. This is all heart work. And to me, even the word work can feel, because what I also know is what turns people away from this work is the fact that it's a little uncomfortable, that it brings up a lot of emotions, and that I think in our spiritual communities, we like the emotions that feel really good. And we maybe have even been taught to not even put any focus on those negative emotions, because then we'll be bringing them into manifestation or whatever, right? And the truth about it is the discomfort for me has always been a sign of like, here's your growth. Like here exactly, like here's the juicy, magic filled area where like, if you look at this and if you even embrace that discomfort, oh, like your life is going to change, right? Because right on the other side of that is truth. Right on the other side of that is an immense amount of joy. And the whole world begins to open up, right? So I don't view anti-racism as like work. Like when I really think about it, like it's the most joyful thing to be a part of. Like it's the most joyful thing to like to feel that like my identity is all wrapped up in the identity of the whole, of every single human. And if there's a piece of our humanity that is crying out and I don't listen, there's something that like breaks inside of me, right? There's something that breaks. And so like this is like the most joyful thing to do. To be a part of anti-racism work is the most joyful thing that one can do, because it is going directly into your identity of oneness, right? In your connection to the whole.
Yeah, so you know there are people who are going to watch this in the recording, or maybe watching it right now and putting in the chat. He thinks this is like cool and joyful and wonderful. I can't listen to anything else he says because he's really weird.
Yeah, I am very weird.
But the discomfort, when you said that, it's like, yes, it's the flower doesn't break through the soil without that, you know, there's a breaking through what appears to be and what is a solid surface, that it has to grow its roots and it has to be nurtured, and then it breaks through to where we can see it above ground, and then we see it flower and become beautiful, right? When a woman gives birth to a child, it is not always physically easy, but it is joyful, but it's breaking through the discomfort, right? It's dealing with the discomfort of that to get a different result. When we learn something new, a new skill, we're uncomfortable because we don't know how to already do it. Even if we think back to the simplest of skills, learning to tie a shoe, we didn't know how to do it and we got frustrated and it was uncomfortable. But sticking with the discomfort and staying focused on the intention, the desire or the goal, we learned how to do it, and now we do it, we don't even think about it. Right. It's just a part of it. And maybe it is similar, that it's a joyful thing to do. I could just reach down and tie my shoe.
How good is that?
Right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, anytime we're making a leap in consciousness or evolution, which to me, like, undoubtedly is what's happening right now. What I've found is often right before that leap, there's some breakdowns. There's a realization of something that's been really hard to admit. There's often like reconciling. Like I have to admit that this is happening in my life. Like I have to admit that I have had this belief about myself in some way, whatever that happens to be, whether that's around relationships or money or prosperity, like Rambo was talking about earlier. Like I have to admit that has been the thing that's been running me, right? And it's only actually when I've done that, then I can free myself from it. It's only when I am able to be like, when I can call that out, but then able to be called into that vision of what can be. Because right on that one, right, once we realize that, then there's like, okay, I see you. I see that this has been operating. I see that it's actually pretty deep. I see that there may even be some grief in giving this up because maybe it has served me in some way. That right on the other side of that, though, there's this ability to move towards what can be in a deeper and more powerful and actually more free way, right? Because we have deconstructed a little bit what's actually going on to the point where we can really see it and then navigate it and then change it for the better, right? This is spiritual work. That's spiritual work. And that feels like what's going on right now, and it's painful. Like there has been an immense amount of pain that has been brought to the surface, as it should be. But right on the flip side of that pain is like this recognition of like, it doesn't have to be this way, right? And we can maybe be the folks that ensure that this kind of pain doesn't happen anymore, and recognize that we all suffer from racism. We all suffer from the privileges that we have, from the myth of whiteness. Even folks that are part of that have benefited from that system of whiteness, they too have had to sacrifice their culture, right? Their identity with their European heritage, and their ability to feel the oneness that is, right? Like we all like we all have suffered, and now that suffering is different, right? But it doesn't really benefit everybody from a spiritual standpoint. Like the system of whiteness and supremacy does not actually benefit anyone from a spiritual standpoint. In many ways, I mean, it affects all of us in different ways.
Yeah, that, you know, on the one hand, other people have said, you know, it affects all of us, right? Racism affects all of us in a negative way. It takes something away from all of us. The white supremacy as a foundation has a negative impact on all of us. And, you know, I was on the conversation, the conversation with Reverend D. Jacquelyn, you know, the aha that, wow, if I am a white person and I've never heard of the amazing work of Dr. Dan, and I don't know who Dan Morgan is, and the foundational role that he played in all of the thousands of people who are in CSL who he influenced or taught. And I've never heard of him before. I have been denied of understanding really a pioneer of, you know, not pioneer in the terms of the first 30 years of science of mind, but a pioneer in laying the foundation for what we experience today. Or the reference to, you know, there are lots of people who were leaders or teachers along the way who were not white, or who were not from one or two families that have been featured a lot. And it's like you don't really know. You don't really know the full history of religious science or science of mind, just like most of us don't know the full history of the United States because we were only fed certain parts of it. So if that's the macrocosm culturally, then there's no surprise that in the microcosm of our spiritual communities that we would replicate that. But now that we know, why would we choose to continue it?
Yeah, I mean, we benefit when everybody benefits. Like we benefit, like equity helps all of us, you know? Like that's why I love, like when we celebrate different cultures in our country throughout the year, through APIA month in May, through Black History Month in February. Like every time that happens, and I know it's only for a month, but I'm like, oh yeah, this is American history. Like we're just learning about American history, and for whatever reason, we have to like go out of our way and spend this extra time like excavating that history, which is a deep part of who we are, right? And so for me, that's another part of the joy, right? Like it's uncomfortable. And what I want to say is like the impact of racism obviously has affected the African American community, the Black and brown folks the most. And so I want to like say that first. So I don't want to say like the ways that the impact of racism in our country has unequally affected us. So I just want to make sure I made that clear.
Yes.
Like we have to also call that out and be willing to say that out loud. But for me, like anti-racism work is also like healing, and it's like reclaiming things that we've lost, right? It's reclaiming aspects of our American identity that have been lost. Um, it's recognizing parts of our shared American identity that we maybe didn't know about that we can all really benefit from. And CSL is no different, right? When we lift up uh, the voices and the teachings of the people of color in our history, we all benefit from that tremendously. Uh, and the way we know that that even CSL is not separate from what everything that has gone on in the world in our country is the fact that I do this exercise with ministers sometimes where I have them like write down their like top 5 spiritual authors, right? I have them just write them down and they just list them out, and then I have them after that list out all their demographic information, right? Um, and I do this with myself. And most of the time and I've done this probably with maybe 30 ministers, uh, it's like all white people, right? So we have to recognize too, like our spiritual tradition, ooh, like we're kind of immersed in these white authors, and what does that do to us subconsciously about what we think of when we think of a spiritual teacher, right? And so then our work is to recognize that that's what's happening, and then disrupt that, and then pursue more diverse voices for our own well-being, and for the well-being of anybody we're speaking to as a minister.
So, Masando, I obviously agree with you, but you also know, like I know, that there would be people who will hear you say that and say, well, what's wrong with that? Because these are the people who have been the leaders and the teachers, and why should I feel bad about that's all I know, and why should I need to know about anybody else?
I mean, I can speak for me personally, and it's kind of just, it points to what I just said in a bit. Like, I know that if those are the top 5 people, then there's going to be something in my subconscious or conscious mind that says, this is what a spiritual teacher looks like, right? And I will cut myself off from having a wider, deeper, uh, more diverse experience, and maybe even this ability to maybe even see myself, right? That could be someone that could also be a spiritual teacher. When I recognize how actually diverse our history is, and to lift up those voices, not just in places I have influence, but like most of all within myself, like within my own consciousness, within my own heart, so that when I think, when I have a picture in my mind that comes up when I think of who are the greatest spiritual teachers, it's not homogenous, right? And that to me is why that's important. But I'm speaking from my own personal, approach, right? I'm not going to say that anything is inherently wrong. I'm just saying how it affects me and my own heart.
Well, and yes, and which is right. What is happening to you is happening to everyone. There's that universality of it all, and I don't think we can overemphasize enough that there are multiple models. There are multiple models, and your model, anybody, this individual model, doesn't have to limit them to
Totally.
right. So
Totally. Yeah. I mean, anytime we're waking up to these things, I think there is this tendency to, I don't know, want to either blame someone else or blame ourselves. Like the guilt that comes up is just an internalized blame that I love that you brought up earlier. And one of the tenets of our spirituality is this tenet of wholeness, right? Like And so whenever I'm waking up to these things, or whenever I'm recognizing that I may be projecting some of these things onto a person or a personality, I think about like this thing I try to hold myself to, which is like, how can I ensure that everyone's wholeness stays intact, right? Like, how can I make sure that I'm feeling whole in this conversation, and that the person that I may be having a disagreement with, or a dialogue, or even a debate with, like, how can I, within myself, allow and ensure that their wholeness stays intact too? And that to me is a standard that is kind of non-negotiable, which is again why spirituality is a deep part of this work for me, because you have to stand against a lot of things in this work, and it's beautiful to do so because you have to call those things out. But how can even the people that are perpetuating the things that we're standing up against, how can their wholeness still stay intact as a human being, right? Which is a really hard thing to do, but it's what our spirituality calls us to do.
And I love that of course you would bring this up right when we're getting near the end of time, right? Because we could dig into this and we could unpack it for at least 30, 35 minutes alone, because one of the things that just lit up in me was this idea where if my intention is to deal with the difficulty of this, the complexity of it, what is mine and what do other people need to do? But underneath that all, I create a standard that I want to do the best I can to keep everyone's wholeness, to make sure everyone's wholeness stays intact. I wrote it down because I'm gonna use it. Everyone's wholeness stays intact. Then it doesn't mean we shy away from what's difficult, but it will temper how we talk about it, how we challenge people, how we engage people, how we create conversation and collaboration to change it, because people are not broken. People are not intentionally sick or angry or mean. And if we want them to change, they're going to change faster from a place of wholeness, not from a place of being chastised, criticized. I mean, and chastise, we correct, right?
Yes.
But
it's redirect.
Right. Okay, right.
Yeah.
Right. We correct, we redirect, we educate, and we set a high standard.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if we constantly are pushing them to that place where they can't feel wholeness, then they're not likely to move.
I'm not likely to move when I'm not feeling whole.
Right. And be a part of dismantling a system that no longer works.
Totally. And both can happen simultaneously. Actually, to me, that's how transformation actually occurs.
Oh, okay. So Tracy, don't get distracted, because like now I really want to go there, but we don't have time to go there. So I just want to remind people that this conversation that I am having is with Reverend Masando Hiraoka, and it is a juicy conversation that will continue, but we just won't be on Facebook Live when we're doing it. And that this conversation is part of the From Hatred to Harmony Summit, hosted by Stained Glass Spirit on the Stained Glass Spirit Facebook page, which you can check out year round, week round, day round. You can always go there for inspiration and information related to the place where diversity, inclusion, and spirituality intersect. My name is Tracy Brown. I'm the founder of Stained Glass Spirit, and it has been a pleasure for me to host these conversations, and especially Masando, to talk to you today. So is there one thing that's in your mind that you just want to either emphasize or share to round us out?
I'm really inspired by Adrienne Marie Brown, who's an author that feels like to be at the forefront of that same intersection that you were talking about, the intersection of spirituality and justice. And her most recent book is called Pleasure Activism. And to me, it really kind of comes to what I was talking to before, that being a part of social change, being a part of creating something new, the bravery and all of the other qualities of God that we gain along the way is like this most pleasurable, joyful, powerful, transformational act. And so I just encourage people to approach it from a point of view of, yeah, there's going to be some work and discomfort again, but there's so much that gives you life constantly along the way. So I guess that's what I wanted to emphasize before we go.
Thank you, Masando.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having me.